Hello everybody, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing well as we slide into the autumnal season. As this is my favourite season, I absolutely love this time of year. The crisp air, the dead leaves, and I love aligning my reading with the seasons. As it's my favourite time of year, I would like to offer you a lot of different reading options for the best autumnal reads. What are the best books to read in autumn? And I would like you to recommend a few in the comments below. Let's get into it. I've got a little bit of a show and tell for you today. But first, what criteria does a book need to fulfill to make a good read around autumn time going into winter? I have a few thoughts on this. Now, the first thing that a good autumn read must have, absolutely hands down, is pathetic fallacy, where the atmosphere reflects the character's mood or reflects the strife, reflects the themes and preoccupations at the core of the book. That means it should have a moody atmosphere, be dark and bleak and cold and crisp and misty. So having a strong sense of pathetic fallacy, having strong evocations of the weather at this time is a must for a good autumn read. An autumn read should also summon nostalgia and wistfulness. I don't know what it is about this season, but as it gets darker earlier, and as the sun doesn't rise till much later, we spend most of the autumn and winter period in darkness. We come home from school or work in the dark. We go to school or work in the dark. The daylight hours are sparse, and what happens is we start to feel a little bit melancholy, don't we? A little bit gloomy. But there's a strange sort of joyful tinge to that melancholy. We kind of embrace it. It's a wistfulness, and we start to think about long forgotten memories that we thought were locked away in the deep recesses of our unconscious start to come to the surface. We take these long autumn walks kicking up the leaves, and we think about our childhood. We think about the different things that have happened in our lives. So a good autumn read needs to have pathetic fallacy and a good moody atmosphere, and it needs to summon nostalgia. It needs to make us reminisce about something. And a bonus would be if the book deals with themes of mortality and morality. Morality tales have historically been very popular close to Christmas time. Dickens revived the Christmas tradition of the ghost story because it forces us as readers to re-examine our own conscience and how we interact with other people in the world. As the year comes to an end and we embark upon a new one, we want to stride boldly forward, not making the same mistakes as we did during the year. We want the next year to be a better year. So it's a period of hibernation and reflection where hopefully, as the sun reunites with us in spring and summer, we are a new person with a more robust, more complex character. And mortality makes sense. The autumn period of our lives metaphorically refers to old age or a passing of youth, and we start to think more about our own demise and how we might best greet death. Montaigne, of course, said that we need not worry about this because we will know exactly how to greet death in the moment it greets us, so we might as well dispense with it. But when it comes to autumn, sometimes we can't help but ponder upon, meditate upon, mull over our own mortality. The work should also be comfort worthy, so there should be something in the work. Maybe it's a reunion with characters that are familiar or characters that we have met before, but something that makes us feel a bit more comfortable. A good autumn read is one that we curl up with, cozy up with a mug of something warm and delicious in front of the fire. And another bonus is if the autumnal read is the mature work of a writer. A twilight piece in a certain writer's oeuvre, a certain canon. The last work of an author is poignant and is often tinged with awareness of their own nascent demise. So, what fits the bill? Taking all that into account, well, first things first, Gothic literature. I'm a huge fan of Gothic literature and Gothic architecture. So, horror stories. Moody, dark stories about reanimated corpses coming to life, haunted houses and things that go bump in the night. Gothic literature is perfect. I also like pastoral literature. Those stories are perfect because pastoral writers, they really indulge long and unwinding descriptions of nature, which is exactly what we want during this season. And serialized reads. This plays into the comfort. We want something that stays constant across time and keeps us company across time. So a story that was originally published in serialized fashion that forces us to slow down, embrace the cliffhangers, and read a short story over a long period, or a long story over a long period, also fits the bill. We want something that we can take our time with, that stays with us all the way up to the end of the year, and perhaps over it too. So my first recommendation, and a great autumnal read, is the author Thomas Hardy, one of my personal favourite authors of all time. You've probably seen a couple of his works behind me. I absolutely adore this writer. This novelist came into his own as a poet towards the twilight of his life, so his poetry is well worth pursuing too. His poetry is tinged with melancholy and nostalgia, an awareness of his mortality and the mortality of those he loves. So I would highly recommend the poetry of Thomas Hardy, and I would recommend any novel that appeals to you that you can get your hands on. My personal favourite is Tess of d'Urberville's. Tremendous story. It is probably the perfect autumn read, in my opinion, or one of them. I also recommend The Woodlanders, Jude the Obscure, The Return of the Native, and Far from the Madding Crowd. And he has some great short stories too. So my top recommendation is Thomas Hardy, particularly Tess of d'Urberville's. Next up, Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights. If you've already read the novel, you know she ticks pretty much all of the boxes, and if you haven't, you can probably guess that she does too. Blustery weather, storms, pathetic fallacy, gothic moody atmosphere. Perfect, a perfect read across cold, bleak autumn and winter months. Wuthering Heights, highly recommended. Next up, Charles Dickens. Seems an obvious one, but it's obvious for a reason. Any of his novels will fit the bill. Any of his novels fits into an autumn or winter reading tradition. My recommendation to you is to make your way through his oeuvre and read one Dickens every year to mark the end of the year. All of his books are great comfort reads, and they're classics for a reason. I would highly recommend reading some of his Christmas stories. It might seem cliche, the tendrils of influence that Dickens has had upon writers today is enormous, so we kind of feel like we know the story. But if you haven't read A Christmas Carol, for example, or The Chimes recently, then do yourself a favour and pick up his Christmas novels and leaf through them. They are perfect autumn and winter reads. Highly recommended. Dickens is stupendous this time of year. Stupendous any time of year, but particularly during autumn. My next recommendation for your autumn reading is to pick up the Shelleys. That is Mary Shelley and her husband, poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. I highly recommend Frankenstein. Again, it fits all the boxes. Pathetic fallacy, gloomy, moody atmosphere and weather. We're reading this as a group, as a weekend read towards the end of the month, October 2021, and we'll be reading this together and enjoying it, relishing it. It's absolutely superb, and any of Percy Bysshe Shelley's is tremendous, particularly Ode to the West Wind. We did a deep dive analysis on this in one of the poetry masterclasses at the Hardcore Literature Book Club, but he is great company for the autumn and winter months, and I would implore you to chant his work aloud. Next up, Henry James's The Turn of the Screw, a stupendous supernatural story, a ghost story with psychologically complex, beautifully painted characters. I've got an entire video that just came out on how to read this in the original serialized publication form. I highly recommend that you read this across 12 weeks, up until the Christmas period. That means you'll read the prologue and have to wait a week. You'll read a couple of chapters and have to wait a week. We'll be doing a discussion at the end of each month in the Hardcore Literature Book Club on this very tale. It's a good one, it's creepy, it's chilling. I would also implore you to either read this one aloud or find a good audiobook so it can be read aloud to you. Find someone you can share the experience with, corral someone, say, hey, this autumn we're going to read The Turn of the Screw like this together, and we're going to discuss it the same way that we discuss TV shows that we love, but these days we just binge them if we love them. Here we're going to exercise some delayed gratification, some restraint and patience, and the rewards will be innumerable. So, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, top choice for autumn. Oscar Wilde is another top choice if you're a fan of Gothic literature. Then The Picture of Dorian Gray, if you've already read it, then why not read it again? Wilde is tremendous. We have a podcast out on the picture of Dorian Gray, so check it out if you want to indulge your love of Oscar Wilde with me. He's a great read any time of year, but particularly around autumn. I would also recommend Samuel Richardson's Clarissa. I've shown off my multi-volume classic Everyman set in one of the past videos showing you my Everymans. This is a great but very long novel with, again, psychologically complex characters. The mood of the novel perfectly fits autumn. You read this novel for the sentiment. Many people will say it's boring. I cannot sympathise with that viewpoint. Perhaps the first couple of pages are difficult, but once you get through them, you will want to voraciously inhale this story. It's so compelling. Highly recommended. We'll also read this together over the long term next year. Another recommendation for you this autumn is Jane Austen, specifically Persuasion. Her late, mature masterpiece, published posthumously. Her brother ordered it with a piece of her Juvenilia, Northanger Abbey, and they were published together. She wrote this in the autumn of her life, and it is an autumnal novel. Now, I had to personally work very hard to appreciate Austen, and this was the novel that cracked Austen appreciation for me. I now love her. I think she's a great author. I can see how influential she is. Her characters are beautifully wrought, beautifully depicted, and the themes, the tender evaluation of one's own life and mortality in Persuasion is endlessly poignant. It's a love story as well, and a really mature one, a really well-developed love story. Not the typical love story. However, if you cannot currently abide Austen, I would implore you to start with Persuasion, and that will lead to a greater appreciation of the sparkling wit of Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. Once again, we have a guided reading experience taking you through this novel in the book club. Great novel, highly recommended, and especially if you like the sublime in romantic literature, romantic poetry, then you'll love this one. Cannot recommend this one enough. Persuasion by Jane Austen. Now, another perfect autumn read, and one that is yet again on the schedule for the book club. You're noticing a trend here. I'm not picking these because they're on the schedule. They're on the schedule because of the time of year and because of their aesthetic merit. These are some of the best books ever written. They are absolutely perfect for veterans of reading or newcomers to the great works. But I highly recommend an autumn read of George Eliot's Middlemarch. Pick it up, rifle through it, treat yourself to the first few chapters, and tell me that this isn't an autumn novel. It's most certainly an autumn novel, and one of the best, one of the greatest novels written in English. It really is tremendous stuff. Middlemarch. Now let's throw a few more poets in there. Wordsworth is great any time of year, but most certainly in autumn. He's also good for spring. Tennyson, In Memoriam, and much of his melancholy poetry perfectly suits the dark season. Shakespeare suits any season. He writes of spring, of summer, of winter, of autumn, but find the sonnets where he depicts autumn and you're in for a seasonal treat. My next recommendation is Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time, a perfect novel for reading at any period of the year. It would be difficult to read the entire work even over the course of the year, and it most certainly would be difficult to read it all within one season. I would highly encourage a deep, slow reading with rereading baked in, journaling and discussion, and maybe only reading one of the volumes of this masterpiece per year. But as it treats the nature of memory, In Search of Lost Time, and because autumn is a season of wistfulness and nostalgia, I find this a great read as the days grow darker. I also highly recommend reading or rereading, and definitely deep reading, Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. I've designated this as one of the most perfect autumn novels. It's the autumn read on the book club schedule. It's a great book for, once again, assessing one's own morality and mortality. It's a perfect book to read up until the end of the year. It's a life-changing book and one of my personal favourites, so I would highly recommend Les Miserables for autumn too. So there we have it. Those are my recommendations for the best autumnal reads. Let me know yours. Autumn is a great period of time to reassess our lives, to sort of go into hibernation. But going into hibernation and going into solitude doesn't preclude us from finding a community. And I think during the autumn and winter months, where things can look a bit bleak and we can find ourselves despairing, this is the most important period of the year for us to connect with a community. It's a great opportunity, and the best way I've found to connect with that community spirit, connect with a sense of ritual and tradition, a sense of meaning, is to talk about books with those closest to us, those we hold dear. And of course, you are always warmly welcome to the Hardcore Literature Book Club, which is filled with lovers of literature discussing these books with great depth and nuance and care. It's a great group. I'd love to see you in there if you're not already. Once again, let me know what you're reading this autumn. What do you recommend others to read? And what makes an autumn read for you? Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, then please hit the like button and subscribe, because that tells me to keep making more content. Have a lovely day, have a lovely autumn, and happy reading. Bye-bye.